Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
It's almost become a cliche at this point, hasn't it? That the bishops will, for the last year especially, react to virtually every single thing the current American administration is doing. They go off the deep end in their responses. And it does begin to make you notice that that under Biden and under Obama, they'd chime in once in a while. But when they would do things, when those administrations would do very questionable things, the bishops would go along with it. You remember 2020, especially 2021, when things got worse. You remember that, how they took our sacraments away from us and didn't even raise a peep in opposition to Caesar demanding that the church render unto Caesar what belongs to God. They went along with it. They didn't chime in when Obama was doing some pretty evil things in foreign policy. But now it looks like the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are the political arm, or the religious arm, rather, of the Democratic National Committee. You'd be forgiven for thinking that. And it's not just the U.S. bishops either. This is becoming international. We'll start with the U.S. bishops, though. We'll go to complicit clergy. You're seeing there a picture of Archbishop Broglio. He's probably the first Catholic bishop who was never in the U.S. military to be the head of the archdiocese of the U.S. military. And the complicit clergy gives us this headline: should Catholic bishops be armchair quarterbacking real-time military decisions? You can tell from the picture of the photograph there, you're getting it has to do with the controlled substance people in Venezuela and their little boats, and them bringing things over to the U.S. through a network of connecting those boats to others. No one is saying that those individual watercraft are going straight from that country to ours. No one has ever made that claim, but they are certainly not fishing boats. If you've seen the actual photographs of what they're doing, it's not fishing boats. Those are the boats, the watercraft for subversive purposes. And they are being targeted by the U.S. military. Now, there are legal questions about this. And the Democrats are promising impeachment if they get power next year. That should give you pause, by the way, because yes, if they get power, we're going to have a replay of 2018 to 2020 all over again. But the U.S. bishops are getting involved, and they're very angry about this. And they've been very angry because, well, again, as I've said this many times, they started getting very angry at this administration when suddenly the funding from the government was shut down for Catholic charities because they make an enormous amount of money. So everything they say now in the political realm has the whiff of greed to it, the whiff of avarice, that they're very upset that they've lost money. You can't get away from that because of the nature of the financial relationship they had with the U.S. government and how they've been behaving since the very short-lived Doge reforms. Very short-lived. Doge doesn't exist anymore. They shut it down. But those cuts remain. And they turn into be billions of dollars that they lost. And remember, Catholics aren't giving money to the bishops anymore. This is hurting them in a very significant way. So everything they chime in on, many of us will doubt anything they say, the veracity of anything they say that touches on the political, because of how much in bed financially they were with the U.S. government. Now, there's a note here, an update, that they'd made a mistake in their initial reporting, but since fixed it, they've thought that Archbishop Broglio had served in the military like everybody else, and were then calling for his court-martial, because usually basically the head chaplain for the U.S. military used to serve in the military. That's how it used to be. The Archbishop of the U.S. military would come from someone with a military background, but for whatever reason, as they say, the Archdiocese of Military Service has notified us that Archbishop Broglio never served in the military. That's an odd choice for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to make and for the Pope to make when appointing him, but there we are. Here are the details of the article. It's fairly short. 6 Democrat lawmakers who are also veterans of military services have come under fire for issuing a video encouraging members of the U.S. military services to disobey so-called quote-unquote illegal orders issued by President Trump. The Pentagon is now considering recalling some of these lawmakers to have them formally court-martialed. Yes, you can be court-martialed after you're out of active duty military service. Religious News Service is reporting that the Archbishop Timothy Broglio, head of the Archdiocese for Military Services, who, unlike his predecessors, never actually served in the military, has issued a statement which appears to echo the Democrats' call for military members to disobey their orders. Quoting the Religious News Service's article, Archbishop Timothy Broglio said that in order to end survivors of an attack by U.S. forces on a boat in the Caribbean would be wrong if they pose no immediate danger to those forces. We'll pause here. The U.S. military has repeatedly said that nobody from the administration ordered them to take a second attempt on them. They've said that repeatedly. Now, if 2026 goes the way some people think it's going to, you're going to see the Secretary of War before a congressional tribunal, probably for impeachment, because they've already said they're going to do that. Trying to wake people up here about the reality of the political situation in this country. To deliberately end survivors on a vessel who pose no immediate lethal threat to our armed forces, Broglio said, is illegal and immoral. He explained that the moral principle forbidding the intentional ending of non-combatants is inviolable. Last week, the Washington Post reported that on September 2nd, in the first of a wave of attacks on alleged people who move illicit controlled substances to the country, who the Trump administration says were headed towards the U.S., why they call him Secretary of Defense? He is the Secretary of War. Pete Hegseth ordered that all people on the boat be ended, resulting in a second strike that ended them. Since then, the administration had said that Admiral Frank Bradley, who oversaw the operation, ordered the second strike to sink the boat. That would be the admiral, the Navy officer in charge of all of it. Bradley is expected to appear before Congress on Thursday. Some legal experts, including a group of former military judge advocate generals, has said if the Washington Post reports are true, then that was a war crime. No one can ever be ordered to commit an immoral act, and even those suspected of committing a crime are entitled to due process under the law, wrote Broglio, which is true. And then the article goes on to say President Trump has made very clear he's going to use the full power of America and the full might of the U.S. to take on and eradicate those organizations that push these illicit materials, no matter where they're operating from and no matter how long they've been able to act with impunity, says the Secretary of State. Now, the U.S. bishops have no credibility in this. None whatsoever. None on anything that has to do at all with politics. They have taken the behavior of the American president, the current administration, as their top issue. They have focused mostly to now on immigration, declaring that it is formally now their most important issue. Not the sacrifice of the most vulnerable to Moloch. No, not that. Never that. Now it's migration. But now they're folding this in because they act like they are the Democratic Party at prayer. That's what they act like. And it's absolutely disgusting. And this is not even limited to the U.S. bishops. This is international. Headline from Info Vaticana: Munia's retraction and the danger of demagoguery in immigration policy. This isn't even an American bishop. And he was sharing fake AI-generated videos of American law enforcement agents rounding up people who shouldn't be here and sending them home, and doing so in an extraordinarily overhanded manner. But it was an AI-generated video, and he shared it. He now retracted it because once he was told that this wasn't even real, of course he did. He had to. But why was he getting involved? This is from the article. Bishop Jose Ignacio Munilla has publicly apologized after sharing a video on social media that included AI-generated images of Hispanic immigrants being detained in the U.S. The prelate acknowledged his error, apologized, and announced that he will now verify all audiovisual materials he shares. He published a new message accompanied by 2 verified videos, insisting that the existence of doctored or deep-faked videos cannot obscure the fact that inhumane treatment is occurring in certain detention and deportation procedures. He also noted that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has unanimously, that means your bishop, condemned the indiscriminate deportations and called for an immigration approach that distinguishes between criminals and families simply trying to survive. In other words, let people who entered the country illegally, a violation of federal law, somehow not call them criminals and let them stay. There are Catholics who are using the immigration system in a lawful manner, who, when you ask them, and I've seen this online, I wish I'd shared the videos, when they are asked in the other countries, when they're trying to go through the system properly, if they've considered coming here illegally, they look horrified that you would ask that. They say, no, I am a Catholic. I will follow the law. This isn't that hard, except for the bishops who have ulterior motives, pretty obviously at this point. However, this retraction highlights a phenomenon that transcends this specific case: the growing demagoguery surrounding the immigration debate. And I would say the growing demagoguery of the bishops around everything this administration is doing. Everything. They have engaged as actual agents of the Democratic Party. They are doing it unabashedly. And yes, I'd be upset if they were doing this for the GOP. The circulation of manipulated content, sometimes by mistake, sometimes deliberately, makes it difficult for the public to distinguish between the necessary compassion for migrants as individuals and the responsible analysis of the policies that should govern migration flows. From a personal perspective, charity always compels us to help our neighbor. No one can ignore the stories of those who have crossed deserts and seas fleeing poverty or violence. This individual, spiritual, or ethical dimension is non-negotiable. But the structural aspect is another matter entirely. Migration policy decisions must avoid falling into sentimentality, which, far from helping, can fuel a vicious cycle. Border deregulation encourages criminal organizations, causes deaths, generates frustration, and pushes entire families, including minors and pregnant women, to undertake journeys that put their lives at risk. Furthermore, it can create economic and social tensions in receiving countries, overwhelming public services, and hindering integration processes. And the author of the article is 100% right, not to mention that those who come from Catholic countries and come here often end up leaving the faith anyway. They do so within a few years of arrival. Many of them do. And this is, I can prove this to you anecdotally. All you got to do is drive around any major city in the American Southwest and see all the Protestant churches that are full parking lots, that have Spanish language names, and they serve migrant communities. Many of them leave the faith. Some of them are even worse than that. Some of them are full on apostatize, leaving anything even resembling Christianity. Not to mention that they then become they're allowed to work under the table, violating further U.S. laws, which is a criminal act, and then doing so, they become exploited by the political system and by the economic system, and yes, the political system. This entire issue has to do with exploitation of human beings. It's a gross violation of human dignity, and the bishops are complicit. Why? Why do they do this? It can't just be the money. It can't. There has to be something else to this. Munia's retraction in this sense is not only a necessary act of transparency, but also an opportunity to reflect on how public debate is constructed. Personal charity and social justice are not contradictory, but they do require distinguishing between moral duty toward the individual and political responsibility toward the common good. The common good is being left out of this. We know the common good is harmed, undermined greatly through the current arrangement of immigration that they're trying to fix. You see this in elevated crime statistics. You see this in some horrifying criminal activity that happens. You see this in the fraudulent use of social services, which all constrain the U.S. budget. Those are limited resources that are supposed to go to American citizens and to people who are here legally. In a time when fabricated images and emotional rhetoric can shape public opinion in a matter of minutes, the challenge is twofold: to verify the facts and to think calmly. Only in this way will an honest, realistic, and genuinely humane debate on migration be possible. They're not wrong, and I will cut the bishop slack in one sense, and only in one sense. I get sent an email from people 2, 3, 4 times a week saying, Anthony, have you seen this? Look at this incredible homily given by the Pope, some bishop, whoever, and it's obviously AI. The whole thing is obviously fake. And a lot of people can't tell. And it's getting worse now because the AI software that does this is getting more and more sophisticated. If you come across these channels, Pope Leo Spirituality, I think is one of them, or Cardinal Sarah Spirituality, Cardinal Sarah Sermons, none of them have YouTube channels. It's a safe bet. If you see a YouTube channel with a cardinal's name in it, unless you know for a fact that it belongs to Cardinal Burke or something, then the content is fake. The sermons are fake. They were generated. The words of the homilies were generated by AI and then made into an AI video, complete with AI audio cloning of the voice. Plenty of these channels exist, cloning the Pope's voice, cloning Father Chris Ellar's voice, Father Ripperger's voice, all these others, lots of them. If you come across a channel like that, there is a way for you to report it. Report the channel. It's a violation of YouTube's terms of service to operate such a channel. So I'll cut them some slack because this is a real problem. A lot of people can't tell the difference between AI and the real thing unless it's obvious. You remember 4 years ago now, the video of Will Smith, AI generated of him eating spaghetti, and it was like horrifying to watch. It looked like something out of a nightmare. That's because AI was in its infancy. But now things have improved dramatically. And it's becoming harder and harder to tell the difference between fact and fiction. So I will cut him some slack on that. But the problem is, all the AI video did do was reveal that he was meddling in American politics. Made all the worse because he's not even an American bishop. To a degree, the American bishops have the right to speak as American citizens, right? But they're meddling. And it's not because it's the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has every right to be involved in things. But these guys have become partisan agents. And that is a huge problem, especially for a party that hates the Catholic faith, hates Catholic morality, and has worked tirelessly to undermine it. And even the leadership, if some of the leaked documents from the Obama administration are any indication, there were people in that administration, a Democratic administration, were working behind the scenes to get Benedict XVI to resign. It's all in those leaks. And yet the U.S. bishops trying to just go along because they've been bought. But it has to be more than money. There has to be something else that goes there. I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments. Pray for Bishop Rolio and Bishop Munilla and all the others. After all, the USCCB unanimously declared migration to be their top issue now. Unanimously, meaning your bishop too. Your bishop too. But this is a sign of the times. Here's another example. Do you remember when on May 8th, Pope Leo XIV was introduced to the world, and he gave his homily talking about how great Pope Francis was and how he's going to continue the work of Pope Francis for reforming the church. And people kind of bent themselves into pretzels trying to interpret that in the most based and red-pilled way they could. Turned out to be a fool's errand, really, as he showed himself to be a nicer version, a more charismatic version of Pope Francis, at least so far. One thing we were promised was it'd be the end of the airline press conferences. No more press conferences for the Pope to the journalists. Any press conference would be very controlled, the messages would be very tight, and would be not scandalous. Unfortunately, that has not turned out to be the case. The Pope has now gone into full Bergoglio mode, Pope Francis mode, where he travels with the press. You know, by the way, that the Vatican will charge journalists a pretty steep fee to travel with the Pope in exchange for near exclusive access to the Pope for press conferences. That's a fact. They do that. It's a kind of a troubling practice they have. This is one of those things that maybe a more conservative Pope in the future, someday in the distant future, will undo, will end that practice. But he is now in the habit of doing this. And you've seen video of this probably online, lots of video of him doing these kinds of press conferences. And some of us think it should be stopped. And I had a lot of thoughts on this, but I couldn't quite make them coherent. But then I read this. This is from the Mundibor blog, saying, hey, with the headline, the airborne circus has to stop. And the airborne circus here in this case is this unbelievable practice of continuing these airline press conferences. And right, at least for now, Pope Leo is doing them more frequently than Francis ever did. Now, that could be because it's early in the Leo papacy. But these airline press conferences, they have to stop. It's time to stop this. And a good way to stop this, actually, there is an underlying error to all of this. You know what the underlying error is? Maybe not an error, but it's a modern practice. Popes didn't travel internationally until pretty recently. I think it was Paul VI was the first to make an international trip. If a pope traveled, it was to somewhere in Italy. He rarely, if ever, left Italy. Pretty big deal if he did. Pretty big deal when he left Vatican City, to be honest with you. But it's a fairly modern practice. And with each subsequent papacy after Paul VI, they became more and more globetrotters. John Paul II was thought to be a globetrotting pope. Well, Pope Francis put him to shame on that. He traveled more than any of them. And now it looks like Leo is going to be doing the same kind of thing. And a good way to stop this practice of these horrifying things being said by a pope to the press in an off-the-cuff quasi-interview at a press conference is to just stop the practice altogether. Leave the traveling to rare occasions. There isn't most of the things a pope does on these international trips can be done remotely via Zoom or some equivalent. They don't need to travel. There's no reason to keep this up. Here are the details. Quote, one thing must be said first. When the Pope travels, the Vatican sells expensive journalist tickets to help pay for the travel costs. Of course, one of the perks of the situation is that then the Vatican offers a chat with the journalists. So you pay for access and the material, which you both would not have if you, as a journalist, would fly on your own to the destination and back at probably a much cheaper cost. So I know why it happens in itself. There's nothing very, in the sense of doctrinally, wrong with that. However, this gives rise to several issues. The first is that it cheapens the Pope. It makes the Pope look like another one of those people who really, really don't want to shut up. It makes the Pope look like an influencer or a politician. A politician needs to be reelected. An influencer needs to sell product. A Pope needs neither. The second one is that if the Pope is stupid, ignorant, arrogant, a heretic, or just a garden variety jerk, we'll say, things will go wrong. The last two popes are a wonderful example of this. The stupidity and vacuity of the slogans alone seriously damages the office. But as we have all seen in the past, it's often worse than that. If you are Pope and you really want to talk spontaneously with journalists without saying the wrong thing, you need to be really good. If you actually want to say the wrong thing, it's even worse. Still, I don't want to be unreasonable. Therefore, I have three solutions, of which two are available to Leo's intellect. The other one is a suggestion for future popes. The first suggestion is the Pope doesn't travel much, and when it does, the Vatican just pays its share. No journalists, no off-the-cuff talks. Seems very linear. Pope isn't a rock star, and he doesn't need to have the America tour or the Africa tour. Let him be a good Pope by just being a good Pope. This isn't rocket science. Pause there. Is that controversial? We live in a time where most people are used to the Pope globetrotting. What we're suggesting here, what Mundibor and I are suggesting here, is that no more of these wide traveling events. That means Pope's not showing up at World Youth Day anymore. I'm not even a fan of World Youth Day to begin with. Every time there's one of these things, I go on or show people how, like, the sacrilegious handling of the Eucharist and other things, and the bizarre behavior of bishops and things, and the horrifying reports coming out about the participation of young lay people. And then people in the comments go, "Oh, lighten up. It's World Youth Day. This is great for people, yada, yada, yada." World Youth Day today is not the same thing as it was in the 1980s. It's not the same thing as that Denver World Youth Day when John Paul II put the secular anti-Catholic media to shame when he showed up, and was it 2 million people or something showed up to see him, and they thought there'd be like 20,000 people. It's not the same thing anymore. The behavior there is gross. And a good way to take care of all this problem with the media, with the journalists, and the Pope saying weird stuff off the cuff, is to just end the practice. You don't need to do this. The Roman Pontiff is not called to be a celebrity. He's not the President of the United States either. or, the head of whoever the global superpower of the day is. That's not who he is. He's the vicar of Christ. Sure, he should have media savvy to spread the gospel. But if he spreads the gospel, he's not going to be doing a faux pas in the media. He's not going to scandalize the faithful by saying weird stuff. Their second suggestion. The Pope travels with journalists who pay a hefty price for the privilege. Therefore, the Pope shows up to them and regales them with a carefully scripted, extremely Catholic short sermon discussing the issue of the day, say the beginning of Advent, the anniversary of canonization, stuff like that. So if you're going to have journalists travel with the Pope, make them pay a steep price for it, and then make it sound like they're basically attending Mass. The sermon must be absolutely kosher, interesting, and edifying. Newspapers will want to write about it because it's quality. All the newspapers who have journalists on the plane have an exclusive reach to it. Everybody is happy. No Q&A at the end. Popes don't do extemporaneous things. It's not very Pope-like. And the third suggestion, if really, really wanted, the Pope could do a Q&A with the journalists. But in this case, the Pope would have to be really, really fit, both at expressing himself clearly and avoiding imprecisions, both of religious and political nature. This is so much above the abilities of Leo, even assuming for a moment he is in good faith, that it's not even funny. And they go on to say they don't think this is unreasonable and the crisis of our time calls for it. And some might object, saying, well, this is above Leo. It is. We've seen that. He was playing nice, it looked like, until early September. And then he met with Father James Martin at the Vatican. Personal, private audience. And as soon as that meeting was over, he just went 100 miles an hour on American politics, immigration debates, all the stuff. James Martin meets with him, and immediately thereafter, you have that pilgrimage, that Jubilee pilgrimage of the James Martin types to St. Peter's for a Mass there, where the bishop who gave the Mass gave the homily and said the Pope explicitly told him to do these things. That's why it's above him. He's on board. He is Francis II, except a more polished version. And that's unfortunate. But I'm curious what you think of this. Do you think those suggestions are right? No more globe-trotting for popes? Or if it's going to happen, you make sure the journalists have to pay a huge price to be there. And then when they're there, they're basically hearing a homily. And only allowing the Pope to say off-the-cuff things if the Pope is one of those naturals with the media, who will then say off-the-cuff things, but is orthodox in what he says. Practically, essentially, what they're saying, what Mundabor said there, is the Pope would have to effectively be a living saint to be able to do it. Which is what you want your popes to be anyway. But prior to Vatican II, from something like the 5th century or something to Vatican II, you had like 3 popes canonized. There weren't that many of them that ever got canonized in that period. And now we've had virtually every single one of the popes from Vatican II to today, either canonized or on the way to canonization, or the argument being made for it. Something weird about that, to be clear. But you want them to be living saints if you're going to be speaking off the cuff to the media. And you have to have a certain level of, we'll call it media intelligence, to be able to handle that. And most people don't have it. Certainly most men in the church don't. Look how many of them open their mouths and sound utterly uninformed about politics when they speak. It's unfortunate. I'm very curious what you think about this. Raven Ray chimes in about World Youth Day, saying the John Paul II's Philippines visit was also for World Youth Day, and there was credible footage of hosts distributed by extraordinary ministers being misused. An easy solution to that is abolish the use of extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. That's a whole other subject. But the whole point of that, of having an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, is in the title. It's extraordinary, meaning it's out of the ordinary. It's for those times when the priest can't distribute communion to everybody. And he and the deacon, if we're going to have permanent deacons, their hands are consecrated, which is what you want for handling the sacred species. They're available. But extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion were only supposed to be for those times when the priest was unable to do it himself. That's it. Extraordinary circumstances. But now they're basically ordinary ministers of Holy Communion because they're at every parish, seemingly, in large numbers. And when you get World Youth Day, you're not going to, a lot of times, these guys aren't properly trained to do it. So, of course, you get scandalous circumstances. MS Americast says the plain conversations almost destroy the trip. So that's pretty much true. Whatever good may have come from the trip is utterly destroyed when the Pope opens his mouth and says things that are scandalous, to say the least. But let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Share this on social media. That helps a lot too. If you ever thought about supporting the work we do at Return to Tradition, options in the description box below. Patreon, Subscribe Star, all that kind of stuff. The Join Plus button is the old Join button. There are perks for it, access to Discord, private Discord group, and the like. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.